Hello, my name is Matthew Morrison, and my project is on Haliotis rufescens, also known as the red abalone. The red abalone is interesting to me because I've harvested it pretty much all my life. It has an interesting history in California in that it was overharvested within the last 100 years. Around the same time that recreational scuba diving equipment became popular, and it met a swift downturn after that. Since then, they've made a comeback north of San Francisco, where the habitat is known as the Lost Coast. It's a lot more inaccessible, and it is better suited for their type of wanted and needed habitat, which is going to be very rocky and sheer cliffs, so it's pretty hard to get to. They This one in particular, I harvested myself a couple weeks ago. It is basically just over the legal size needed. There is a lot of rules and regulations and stipulations around being able to harvest them in California. Mainly its size, they have to be over 7 inches. You can only harvest 3 in a day, and I believe 18 in a year. Also, like I said, you have to follow the regulations through the Department of Fish and Game with a fishing license as well as a separate tag. You tag them as soon as you pull them out of the water, so they're very tightly regulated, essentially. Other than that, this one here, being a little over 7 inches, it takes about 10 years for an abalone of that size, a red abalone, to reach about that size. So they are very slow growing. They are known to be a delicacy worldwide and are found on almost every continent or the coastline of every continent. The red abalone specifically, though, its habitat ranges between Baja, Mexico, and Oregon. Are heterotroph and have been around for at least the last 100 million years, as evidenced from fossil record within different cave dwellings. So even back then, they were used as some type of food source, just as today they're known as a delicacy worldwide. They do prefer the cool waters off the Pacific coast mostly, and are found usually in the rocky depths between 1 and 100 feet. That has more to do with the food source that they consume most of, and that is going to be kelp. Kelp needing some type of substrate itself to attach itself to, can't be in very deep waters, otherwise photosynthesis wouldn't be able to occur. They do have a large foot that is not visible here, as this abalone has been deshelled. See the pearlescent inside of the shell there. It uses that foot for mobility as well as being able to adhere itself to any substrate. It's going to be able to suction itself down as it moves, and in order to protect itself from predators, being able to pry itself away. Also, from the environment itself, being able to sweep itself away. Usually in the shallower subtidal areas, the waves get very strong, the currents are very strong, and it could easily pull other types of animals, if it didn't have that type of foot, away from its structure. So it gladly has that type of foot to really anchor itself down. They're almost impossible to remove without a tool, and once it decides to clamp itself down onto a rock. They range in size up to about 12 inches, but those are becoming increasingly rare to find and hard to get to, very inaccessible, like I said. They do prefer rocky bottoms, as that gives them the best chance at survival against predators, as they can adhere to that. Sandy and gravelly bottoms they typically stay away from. Also, due to their main food source being kelp, kelp would need a rocky bottom as well in order to attach itself. They do prefer relatively shallow water for the reasons I've already mentioned. Water clarity isn't really something that is of a necessity, as they use little tentacles that come out from underneath that are only about an inch or two long in order to feel themselves different, as they can feel their way, more so than having to actually see. They can can withstand high pressures. They are only found up to about 100 feet, but their shell, being made of calcium carbonate, can definitely withstand much higher pressures than 100 feet. They typically only go to that range due to the food source that they consume. The temperature range that they're found is between 12 and 18 degrees Celsius. It's going to be that way due to that being the main temperature range in their habitat here off of the California coast. They do prefer the pH level in the water being at about what you see here off the coast of 8.0 to 8.3. Once it does drop below 8.0, you start seeing issues with shell development. Not really with adult abalone, obviously, but with the offspring of the young abalone. The shells would be much thinner, much weaker, and would cause developmental issues with the shells being cracked, or they can be easily destroyed from predators can get at them and exposing the meat of their shell. So that would very likely be one of the main issues when you start talking about ocean acidification with their development. I'll get more to that in here in a little bit. They are mobile, and like I mentioned before, use that foot to migrate across the seafloor. They typically will do that seasonally, depending on where their kelp is. If there's an area that runs out of kelp, they will migrate to an area with kelp and typically stay away from those barren areas. And they are voracious eaters of kelp. They do reproduce outside their body. Male and female both release their eggs out through these vents. They usually only have about 4 or 5 vents open at a time. As they grow larger, vents start dropping off at the end here, and then more open up. Their mouth, as you see here, this is the abalone shell. The mouth would be this here. There's 2 small grinders that act as teeth that, as they move along eating kelp, they actually do grind the kelp up and consume it. Let's see here. They do not use current as a form of movement. As I mentioned before, they use mainly that foot, and they do exclusively feed on different varieties of kelp and not really much else. They prefer the rocky coast between Oregon and California, and those happen to be the most dense populations, as they've allowed for the best environment for growth and for that population to come back from overharvesting. Their found location classification is benthos, as they're found on the bottom of the ocean floor, and their primary predator is going to be anything from sea otters, sea lions, can be us, we're a number 1 predator from them, any carnivorous scavengers that can pry them away from their substrate. That's why they do have that adapted foot in order to keep them on the seafloor as much as possible. Their thick armor shell here is extremely tough and has many uses. Sometimes you can even use it as like a bowl, which is what I was actually going to be using this one for. So it's kind of nice. Many people throughout time have used them for lots of different things, for tools, and obviously jewelry. They release a type of excretion between themselves and the shell that leaves this pearlescent mother of pearl. They're one of the few creatures that does this in nature, so it's very beautiful and is very popular for jewelry. They are slowly making a comeback, and mostly have made a great comeback north of San Francisco. It has been said too, when talking about pollution and human interaction, that if ocean acidification increases or continues at its rate, within 200 years, these will not be able to survive in their natural habitat because of the breakdown of the shells at their early stages being so thin. That would essentially put them on the endangered list, or make them slowly go extinct from their natural habitat, at least, just by the onset of eliminating them at their earliest stages. That is pretty much my presentation on the coastal red abalone, as you see here. And I do enjoy, like I said, consuming it, but cleaning and consuming the coastal red abalone is a whole video in itself, so maybe for next time. Thank you for enduring through my video. I tried to keep it kind of short and sweet. Still looks like we're running about 11 minutes, but thank you for watching, and I hope you had a good quarter.